feel like my hair looks really messy, but I put in a Christmas scrunchie just for this. Hello and welcome to a new video. Today I am going to be doing some recommendations. This will be a pretty quick recommendation video. I have 5 recommendations for Christmas romance books. Now I have not read very many Christmas romance books. I think I have read 6 and I'm recommending 5 out of the 6, but I have really enjoyed the books that I've read and it's just so much fun and it's a fun way to get into the festive season, so I thought I would recommend the ones that I have read and really liked. My most recent Christmas romance read that I read was Wrapped Up in You by Jill Shalvis, and this is part of her Heartbreaker Bay series. This is number 8. You don't have to read them in order, I haven't. But I really enjoyed this book. It was so much fun, and the characters, and I think this is just something Jill Shalvis does really, really well. The characters were so lifelike and just so real, and it was really entertaining to read and just so interesting. It follows the main heroine who has sort of been kind of on the run her whole life. She's never really stayed in one place for long. She's always been just sort of someone who goes from place to place. She didn't really have a great family life growing up. Her brother's a criminal and her mom was kind of in and out of their lives. So her whole life she's kind of been the same, just going to place, but she finally decides that she's going to settle down in San Francisco, and she buys a food truck and has been really loving that business. She had worked in bars and restaurants throughout her adolescence and early adulthood, and so she finally decided she's going to open up her own food truck, and it is like a taco food truck, and she is doing really well with that. She's been saving a lot of money. She's planning on like buying a condo, and she finally feels like she can take a breath because she has a home. She's not running like she has been all her life. And she meets a friend of a friend's cousin. It's like her friend's boyfriend's cousin or something along those lines. He's in town from Idaho or Iowa or somewhere equally like that, and he is on sort of a forced vacation because he is a cop and his partner ended up being corrupt, and he kind of got tangled up in the whole mess of it, and the police department asked him to take a leave, and so he did, and he's still reeling from that. He really hates that he was lied to. Some really hard childhood trauma. That is another reason why he hates being lied to so much. And they meet and they hit it off, but she's very callous and she doesn't want help and she's very independent, and so she pushes him away a lot at first, but they kind of just keep meeting and he is persistent. He's like, I don't want to take your independence from you, I'm offering my help. Like her taco truck in the beginning of the story gets broken into and he helps her with that and everything, but it was just such a good story. There are some semi-unrealistic things that happen towards the end as part of the climax, but honestly it could happen, and it was just really entertaining and like kept me on the edge of my seat. I really liked these characters. There was a lot of emotional growth and a lot of plot growth. It was a fairly short novel, but it was just so good, and I definitely recommend this one. Next is Claiming the Rancher's Heir by Maisie Yates. Now this is quite a short book. I wouldn't technically call it a novella, but it's part of the Harlequin Desire range, which typically those are just shorter books. And it also means they are very steamy, so if you don't like a steamy book, you probably won't like this one. But I absolutely loved it. It has one of my favorite tropes. I know a lot of people hate it, but it has a surprise pregnancy that's not a spoiler. It's literally in the title. But I loved this book. I love Maisie Yates' writing. She is just so entertaining, and she writes really like just fun stories. They are very strong, like get what they want type of hero characters, and while the heroines are independent and strong in their own way. It is very much like sort of a male dominant sort of romance, but I really, really like them. It is a cowboy romance. Maisie Yates writes a lot of cowboy romances. This one takes place as part of the Gold Valley Vineyard series, and in this one they are the heirs kind of to these companies. It is the eldest daughter and the eldest son from rival wine companies, and they have always not gotten along just because they have very different companies. She comes from this very sophisticated, fancy wine vineyard, and they are just like always throwing really fancy parties and all this stuff, whereas he comes from a more like a farm and vineyard. They are much more like down to earth, I guess, very cowboy-esque. That's the whole point, and they really go with that theme, very hometown grown, that kind of vibe. And so they've always butted heads because they just are so different. But recently her vineyard has had quite the scandal because I believe this happens in the first book of the series. This is number 2, and I might go back and read the first at some point. It is revealed that her father has been having an affair and lots of other terrible things. If I'm remembering right, it was even like a really inappropriate age affair. So there's been a big scandal with her dad, and she is very emotional about that, but the business has to keep going and they're all just trying to move on. So it is Christmas time in the book, obviously, and they are talking about trying to team up the 2 vineyards to throw this party for great promotion for both of them, and she's just trying to get out of the limelight of that scandal. She just wants to move forward, and he, as much as they don't get along, he wants to help her because he's also very attracted to her and she is to him. And this conversation leads to quite the steamy night, and that results in her getting pregnant. And from there, they have to navigate the relationship as what they thought would just be a one-time thing to eventually becoming parents. Kind of slowly falls for him, and he's very reluctant to be involved in an actual romantic relationship, but he very much wants to be a part of the baby's life because of some really complicated history in his past. And it was just really, it was really well written. It was a fun read. I literally read it in one day. I really enjoyed it, and I would definitely recommend it. Next, another Jill Shalvis book because I really like her. These are only the only 2 books I've read by her, but I definitely will be picking up more. This is called Chasing Christmas Eve. It's also part of the Heartbreaker Bay series. This is number 4. Again, you don't have to read them in order. But this is about 2 characters. By the way, notice how I'm not saying anyone's names because I don't remember anyone's names. I don't know what to tell you. But this is about a heroine who is secretly a worldwide best-selling author. She writes these fantasy books that are like beloved by many. Like I would compare them to maybe like Harry Potter, Game of Thrones, that sort of thing. She writes something that like everybody reads, everyone talks about it. I think there might even be movie adaptations in the book. And she is trying to work on writing the next book in the series or the last book or whatever, and she's kind of freaking out because she's in a total like writer's block and no one knows that it's her. I mean, her publisher and her agent and stuff do, but like the general public, she keeps her identity a secret. And on top of all that, she has always been the person who takes care of her family. She takes care of her younger brothers even though they are literally like 20 and 22 or something, and she just feels so much pressure, especially around the holidays. She's always been the person who takes care of her siblings and her mom, and she has to write this book for her agent even though she kind of wants to start writing something different. And she just kind of breaks under all the pressure, and she decides, you know what, I'm just gonna run away for Christmas and I'll come back after the New Year's and deal with it later. And so she books a flight from New York to California, and she goes to San Francisco to spend the holidays as sort of a writing retreat and also just to literally get away from her family and everything. And here is where she meets her love interest. He is the man who owns the building she ends up staying in. She rents the apartment for, you know, like a 1-month lease, and he is this big like tech guy. I've never really understood entirely what he did. He made drones or something, and then there was like something to do with the army and they used the drones. I'm not entirely sure, but he was a big tech guy, very rich, literally owned like this whole block of San Francisco, and they are very reluctant to get to know each other because she's only supposed to be there for a month and he just has like a bad history of not being present in his relationships, and he feels very guilty about his last relationship. But they get to know each other and they fall in love, obviously, and it's just a really good book. There is just a lot of emotional development. I think Jill Chavez just does that really well, as she has to come to terms with who she is and what that means for her future and her career, and how she needs to learn how to not take care of her entire family and take on all their burdens, and he needs to learn to care for other people and let go of his past as well. And it was just such a fun read. Next is probably my favorite on this list, and that is Moonlight Over Manhattan by Sarah Morgan. This was such a good book. I want to pick up more Sarah Morgan books, hopefully very soon. So Sarah Morgan was a nurse in England before she was a writer, or while she was a writer as well. And so the accuracy in the medical terminology in this book made me so happy, which is such a specific thing to care about. You probably don't care, but I care. And it was very obvious that she didn't just Google something and throw it in there. Like, she understands these things. So the main hero is an emergency room doctor, and that has always taken up all his time. He's never really had any time for relationships or getting to know people for real and really making connections. He had a girlfriend for a while, but he always chose his work over everyone else. And then she is a twin, and her twin has recently got engaged and moved away to like the countryside sort of, instead of the city, New York City. She has decided she is just going to take charge of her life and really start living, because she's always been very timid, very shy, and she wants to really start working better. And she owns this dog walking business, which didn't know that was a thing, but I guess it is. If you're a dog lover, this would be a pretty fun book for you. I didn't really care about that part, but she is now running the business entirely on her own instead of with her sister, and that requires a lot of courage on her part, because it's a lot of like socializing and being in charge of stuff, and she really is pushing herself to do more things she's uncomfortable with. The whole premise of the book is she has this whole list of things she wants to do even though they make her uncomfortable. And so how they meet is that she goes on a blind date. That's one of the things on her uncomfortable to-do list, and she hates him because he's like a creepy old guy, and so she escapes through the bathroom window in the restaurant, and she sprains her ankle jumping out of the window. So she goes to the emergency room, and that's where she meets the doctor, and da-da-da. And then they meet up later when she is babysitting / dog walking his sister's dog, and they sort of bond over having to take care of this dog, and the fact that they had met before, and she starts to tell him about her list and all that, and it's just so sweet. This one is definitely a bit less steamy if you don't really like that in a romance book. It's just really heartfelt and heartwarming, and I loved it so much, and it's got some pretty great representation that I don't see very often, with a stutter, which was really interesting, and they handle it so well in the book. Again, I feel like it's because Sarah Morgan is a nurse, she understands the science behind it, and there's some really great like techniques in there about how she works through the stutter and all that, and it was just such a good book, and I can't wait to pick up more Sarah Morgan books because I loved this one so much. It's not super Christmassy. The Christmas is just sort of a backdrop to the story. She does decide she's spending Christmas on her own, which is one of her things that makes her uncomfortable, and so she's spending it by herself in the city, and so that's kind of the aspect. And then he has some problems with Christmas too. He's not a really big fan, or at least he used to be, now he's not, all that. But it was just overall a really, really good story. Lastly is another Maisie Yates book, and that is Hold Me Cowboy. This is part of the Copper Ridge series, but it is also part of the Harlequin Desire line. This is another really fun one, a bit shorter, and it's just a fun steamy, spicy book to just pick up and read with like a dash of Christmas. If I'm remembering right, and I read this one quite a while ago, I read this in like July for Christmas in July actually, but this is got the trope that they get snowed in and stuck together and they just get to know each other that way, and they can't deny that there's an attraction between them, so it goes from there. And frankly, that's the extent of the plot that I remember, but I do remember really liking it and like being on the edge of my seat and wanting to see more of this story. This one, because of the short length, the characters were a little bit underdeveloped, but it's like a 200-page book. Like, I can't put too much blame on that. But overall, I did really enjoy it, and I want to pick up more Maisie Yates books for sure. I lied actually, I'm gonna do one more because I forgot I had a historical romance, Christmas romance, and that is Seduce Me By Christmas by Deborah Rayleigh, or Alexandra Ivy, I think is her other pen name. It was about this heroine who is kind of like the old maid of the town. She's not that old, but she's unmarried, and she just kind of likes to take care of these kids because their mom has kind of abandoned them, and she cares for them, and she doesn't really do a lot else. She's not really interested in finding a husband. She just wants these kids to have a good life and to take care of them. But she meets the hero, who's sort of a reformed rogue, rake sort of guy, and he's in town trying to find some answers about his past, and he finds himself just absolutely enthralled with this woman, and they sort of start to build a relationship. She's very reluctant because she just wants to take care of these kids. She doesn't want to cause any trouble, but they do get to know each other and they do start to fall in love, and it is just a very sweet story. It's got this really nice little cottage that's like in the snow, and it's a really cute setting. While it was a bit slower of a story, I did still really like it. It's a very cute Christmas historical romance. So those are all my Christmas romance recommendations. I hope that you liked them. If you have any that you really like and want to recommend, I would love to hear them in the comments. I'm always looking for more romance reads. I hope to read more Christmas romances so I can have more than 6 recommendations for you next year, but I have really loved this genre. If you liked this video, go ahead, like, share, subscribe, and all that fun stuff. I am planning on uploading quite a bit this month and next month, so I hope you stick around for more. I hope you enjoyed this video.